for getting the full experience. And one of them is not feeling fully confident that I've been informed of etiquette and correct behavior. So whenever I'm in that environment, even before we're in the lodge, I'm very conscious of trying not to do something wrong or upset or offend someone. And so I think that yesterday's will probably help me a lot in that, and that's instead of being worried about that, I can more fully embrace the experience. So I appreciate that very much. I'm supposed to pick someone else, probably.
Yeah.
Eric.
Me. I'm looking forward to today. I looked at the sheet that was sent out, and I think today might be quite emotional and difficult day to sort of listen to things that have the history of colonization, really. And so I'm feeling a little tentative, but always wanting to learn more and try to be as empathetic and open and respectful as I can be for this. And I am going to pick Rachel.
Actually, I just want to actually interject 1 second. Erica, I'm so sorry. Can you request the live transcript?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Forgot.
Sorry,
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think I was thinking a lot yesterday that of how much respect I have for the generosity of Jacques and of everyone here, and that I don't. I think in my day-to-day life and particularly my work life, I'm not necessarily that open. And so the idea of being in the right headspace and the openness and that sort of thing was really an interesting thing to reflect on in how I work. And yeah, I've just been thinking about that. So thank you. Brent.
Thanks, Rachel, and everyone. Yeah, it's been 2 jam-packed days full of just amazing knowledge and sharing, and I'm so grateful for that. I've left both days with my head a little bit spinning, but in a good way, and sore fingers from typing so fast, trying to keep up too, so that I don't forget anything, because otherwise I'm liable to. I was really excited to go. We actually had a reception. It's the first time our staff, musicians, and a good chunk of our board has been together in one physical location in like 2 years. And I had some really great conversations with some of our board members and musicians who serve with me on our idea committee. And I think we've committed to going for a sweat at some time in the next, I don't know, half a year probably, sometime not in the not too distant future, and pursuing some more of that practice as a group, which I'm excited about. And I'm also excited for some conversations that I'll be having right after this, our session today, on a project that we're working on. We're co-commissioning a concert, educational concert about Ojibwe horses that will premiere in March. And for most people I didn't know anything about Ojibwe horses or that they even existed until my colleague, who is a horn player in the orchestra and was involved in saving the breed from extinction, essentially, got involved, and it's grown into this whole beautiful thing. So there's so much that I'm learning here that I can immediately apply in that project as we work on it together, which is exciting. And I'll just mention too, I'm going to be distracted here for a couple of minutes. A former student of mine is rehearsing with the orchestra right now. I'm streaming the rehearsal on my iPad, so I'm going to turn around and take a selfie so I can text them and say hello. So thank you all. I will pass the Zoom to Eliza.
Hi, it's Eliza, actually. It's okay. It's very common. I tell people that to think of me as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And that seems to work because everyone has a different way of remembering things and stuff. So that seems to generally cover the bases. But a lot of people don't know what the Leaning Tower of Pisa is anymore. So that's sort of like, what? Huh? So that's always fascinating to me. I feel a lot better today than I have in a couple of weeks. And after last night's session or yesterday's session, I called this guy that we call each other brother and sister. And he's Lakota. And he's taught me a lot of different things over the years. He's a lovely person. And I said, you know, I just feel like I don't know what to do with myself anymore. And I don't know what kind of art I should be making. And I want, you know, I'm trying to put out a CD, but I don't really give a crap about it. Or and I'm like, I have all this wonderful jewelry equipment and I'm not making anything. I said, I feel like I'm just really working on my spiritual self. And I feel lonely. And I feel like I'm not part of any community right now. And he said, what kind of community do you want to be part of? Some question. And it really actually made me feel more hopeful, because it made me feel like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm looking actually for a community of people right now, and they don't necessarily have to be in Manitoba because of, you know, our internet and everything, and that I can be genuine with. And what was really beautiful, Jacques, was in your code of ethics, you know, it's everything that I believe in and that I try to be. And sometimes I'm not successful. I mean, we're all learning all the time. But I was thinking, yeah, that's the community I want to be part of. So it was really, yeah, I just feel more hopeful today, and the knowledge and the discussion and just people showing up to learn about this gives me hope as well. So thanks everyone, and I'm really glad to be here. I'm gonna pick where
I
are
think
you?
I'm the only one left.
Janelle, yes, I was looking for your name, Janelle.
Hello. Yeah, I'm really sad that I missed most of the talk yesterday. But I did get to catch the code of ethics, which was really great. Yeah, and I'm just looking forward to learning more today. I'm always interested in learning more about the residential schools, because it's something that we were never taught in school. You know, it's a history that we really need to acknowledge and talk more about. So yeah, you know, it's always a tough topic, as Erica had mentioned, but I'm still looking forward to it. And then I think Natasha is there as well, but I'll pass it to her if she can.
Looks like
How you doing, Natasha?
maybe she's not in yet.
She may have to reconnect. I'm not sure. Thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts. It's so appreciated. I think the search for community is something that is universal for certain. And I think it changes as you have new experiences, what you're looking for. But the teachings and the ethics that Jacques talked about seem to be the big connecting force with everyone.
And with COVID, it's a lot harder because I'm finding myself not going to events like I normally would. Like I'm
Mhm.
not going to readings or concerts or art shows or, openings of things like I once would have. And we usually have a Christmas sale here with like 100 artists, and the building is packed for 2 days straight. And for 2 years in a row now, we've had to cancel it. And usually that's a big event in the community that we have and the artists love it because they get to hang out with each other and do some trading on the last day, and people they might not see that often that they get to reunite with. And so it makes a huge difference not being able to partake in events.
Hey, Natasha. It's okay. Did you want to take a few minutes to share something? And I also need to ask everyone's permission if I may take a photo of your beautiful
Of
faces.
course.
Okay.
I left yesterday just with a incredible buzzing. I just had so much on my mind, especially when we went over like your code of ethics, Jacques. That was really powerful for me because it really, as I said, I grew up like really associating with the Métis culture, and there was so much kindness and acceptance. And the one that stood out for me was just, I mean, the way my dad used to word it was you never know who you're speaking to. So always speak with respect. You don't know somebody's origins. You don't know somebody's history. They could be the ambassador for some country that you don't know. They look like a grocery clerk, but they could be, somebody that can help you find your true calling. So always respect that. So that was kind of, those messages really rang true for me. And I just really loved hearing where everybody else was coming from too, because I don't know, I don't want to say the P word, but this pandemic has me kind of feeling disconnected to who it is that I'm talking to, that I'm associating with. Like really, I think it's really great to see some generosity in like more than just who we're looking at and the subject matter. So thanks everyone for that. Sorry I missed this. I'm so sorry.
Oh. So
And
thank
Jacques,
you. And today, yeah, like somebody said, today's going to be a little bit of a heavier day. So we're going to start with teach, and it's a very sacred ceremony. And I've only attended one, and I went as a spectator, not a participant, and it was like a really heavy spiritual experience for me to see what actually goes on in a Sundance for 4 days, and what they put themselves through. It could be 35 degrees outside and they're dancing morning till sunrise to sundown, and just that personal sacrifice for their community or for their loved ones that they're dancing for, and just that sacrifice of even flesh offering, piercing and dragging skulls, or pulling back from the tree for a flesh offering. But we'll get, so it was a heavy, like a really spiritual, but really not impressive, but like a really, I guess, really eye-opening, or really the level of commitment was astonishing. So we'll go through the Sundance teachings today, and then we'll go into the arrival of Columbus and the last 500 years. Everyone's heard of the Sundance or been to, or so. So in the picture, you can kind of see someone dragging a buffalo skull. And then there's like a contrary following the person. And you can see the blood dripping from the piercing, and the connection to the eagle, which is the connection to the creator, and the smudging coming in from the back. So we're going to talk about the Sundance ceremony. The Sundance is a ceremony practiced by some Indigenous people of the United States of America and Canada, primarily those of the Plains culture. So it's something very specific to the Plains region, and a lot of, and so very, very specific to our region as well. It usually involves the community gathering together to pray for healing. Individuals make personal sacrifices on behalf of the community. So in the sweat lodge, you're there for personal healing. And with the Sundance, you're there for the community healing and behalf of others that you're praying for. So it's for the community at large for the Sundance, and the sweat lodge is more for personal healing. So there's a little bit of difference between the two. The Sundance is one of our most sacred ceremonies handed down to the Plains people by the Creator. This ceremony has been with our people since the time of our first ancestors and is still with us after many thousands of years. So it's a very old ceremony. And you can see in the picture, you cut the flesh and you put pegs or bones behind it, and then you pull on it until the flesh breaks through. So you can people either pierce from the front and pull off a tree, or they pull in the back and drag skulls. So it was performed in the summer, usually in late July or early August after the buffalo hunts. The Sundance ceremony has both spiritual and physical significance for the individual dancer. Traditionally male, but presently females are included in some tribes, but do not undergo piercings. But they do flesh offerings. I know some women who have gone and have offered flesh for at the ceremony. Some ceremonies include a sweat lodge ceremony, usually the night before the dance. The dance ceremony itself lasted from 8 to 4 days, but currently 4 days is the custom. So no, modern Sundance, usually it's a 4-day event. Sometimes there was fasting before the dance. This fasting from food and liquid typically occurs within the 4 days of the dance. So within that 4 days, you go without food and water. And you're exposed to the elements. It could be cloudy and pouring rain for 4 days, or it could be super dry and plus 35 for 4 days. So you're at the will of the weather. So on tree day, the day before Sundance begins, a scout is selected to find the poplar tree that would stand at the center of the Sundance circle. So in the Arborg, in the center of the circle, they would erect a poplar tree. So someone is sent out to find a really nice tree for that. Blankets are placed on the ground where the tree would land as the tree is carried back to the Sundance circle. The blankets are retrieved from where the tree has passed and placed before it by the women, so the tree never touches the ground. And this kind of reflected on what someone mentioned yesterday about not walking over things, or to that show of respect of things not touching the ground or not being walked over. And even that tree is considered sacred. So the blankets are put down for the tree to rest on, and then the blanket's brought into the circle again for the tree to rest upon. The tree is brought into the circle from the west. Bundles of sage and tobacco are then tied to the top of the tree by sun dancers to represent prayers that they have. And also ribbons, you know, there's the sun dancers will go and they'll tie their ribbons into the tree. They'll tie their medicine bundles into the tree. You know, the medicine is tied in there. The tree is then carefully placed in the hole in the center of the circle that has been prepared for it. So all those ribbons and medicine are placed in while the tree is on the blankets on the ground. And so the people participating would go and tie their medicine and their ribbons into the tree before it's raised up. And that's kind of a picture of what it looks like. So there's the arborg around and then the tree in the center. The spiritual aspect of the sun dance ceremony is the most important part, both for the dancer and the community. For the dancer, their participation represents a quest for spiritual power, a purification, and a communion, or at least an attempt to communion with the Great Spirit. For instance, this is the reason why the cottonwood or the poplar tree is freshly cut prior to some ceremonies and ceremoniously raised in the center of the dancing circle. The tree represents the Great Spirit, the provider of all. So when they're dancing, that tree with the medicine in the center of the circle represents that Great Spirit. All of the suffering and pain which the individual dancers endure during the ceremony is not dedicated to the tree itself, but to the Great Spirit. So the tree is the conduit, it represents the Great Spirit. So all the dancers reflected onto the tree, but to the Great Spirit through the tree. Each participating dancer seeks his own medicine, sometimes with only a minor direction from the sun dance chief or leader. Because you're dancing 4 days without food and water. So, you will get visions, you will have that voice speaking to you, and there's that chance for you to connect to the greater power. So there's going to be things going through you as you're dancing for 4 days. This is so because during the dance, the spiritual relationship, which includes the power, purification, and communion between the dancer and the Great Spirit, is purely individualistic. So it's again, you're dancing with others, but there's no communication with others. You're just communicating strictly between the Creator and yourself during those hours and days of fasting and dancing. Therefore, the individual seeks through his effort to be purified, so his communion with the Spirit will be more intense. Frequently, visions are seen which help the individual during the dance and throughout his or her life. So you will feel things and hear things and see things, through that suffering, that dedication, that pushing through. So the 4-day ceremony begins with the rising of the sun on the first day. So that's what it begins with the sunrise. They enter the circle from the west, they enter the circle from the east where life begins. The men and women enter the circle each morning and dance without food or water. A sweat lodge ceremony is usually held for the male dancers on the evening previous to the sun dance. The female dancers hold their sweat lodge ceremonies in the morning of the dance. So after, so the men would have it after dancing in the evening, and the women would have it before dancing in the morning. And sometimes they would be offered a cup of water in the sweat. And again, that's up to the person holding the sweat if they were allowed to. But I've heard at times that they would be allowed to pass around a cup in the sweat lodge. The ceremonial procession is led by the Sundance chief, followed by the holy men, and then a man carrying a buffalo skull. This begins the Sundance. So there's an old photograph I found. There is no rehearsal because the Sundance is annual thanksgiving to the Great Spirit and to all the powers between the breathing ones and the Great Spirit. So it's that Thanksgiving, the person is giving their thank you to the Great Spirit. So there's like that giving of oneself, the punishment, the flesh offering, I will get into that a little more soon, real soon. In the opening ritual, a woman usually enters the arena and dances full circle around the tree, and then rejoins the rest of the dancers, who then may enter the arena, stopping in each direction, east, south, west, and north, to pay homage to the powers of the four directions. Then a holy man or woman addresses the crowd to tell the way of the Sundance and to impart a message of tribal morals and value. The men and women enter the circle each morning and dance without food and water. The Lakota Sundance, the Uweng Yag Wachipi, may be translated as dance looking at the sun. So the original words, the Lakota words, it translates to dance looking at the sun, which has been kind of translated to Sundance. So, but basically you're looking at the sun all day. At most ceremonies, family members and friends stay in the surrounding camp and pray in support of the dancers. So you're allowed to bring, friends. You're isolated. You're dancing. You're away from them. Because the one I went to had a large fenced area, and basically the dancers were on the inside of the fence area. And then people had, there's a camping section further down, and people were allowed to be on the outside of the fence for, moral support and to be there, for moral support for their friends who are participating in the Sundance. And not everybody makes it. Like it's a tough event, and some people, might drop out after a day or two. And some people go for years before they can actually make it 4 days without actually giving up, and there's no shame in that. That's a very tough thing to go through, and kudos for them for even trying it and to participate in it and to be part of that Sundance family, and then some people, they do it they tan and they pierce and drag for 10 plus years before they themselves can become a Sundance chief and run their own Sundance if they would like, or to help the community one, so there's many levels, or also just you can go and be there for support as well. You don't necessarily have to dance or pierce. So there's a role there for everybody, and the drum is going all day long. So you have drummers that are coming and going and putting in hours or two here and there and taking shifts, and the sacred fire is always burning. So you need, there's people there to take care of the fire and to make sure that's always burning. So there's a lot going on, and there's a room for a lot of people to participate, to be involved with it. Much time and energy by the entire community is needed to conduct the Sundance gatherings and ceremonies. Communities plan and organize for at least a year to prepare for the ceremony. And I have a lot of friends at Sundance, and they're like, yep, We have a Sundance family meeting, and now we're making medicine bags, and now we're making skirts, and now we're making cedar head, for wearing on your head, crown, or a cedar crown, or sage crowns, or there's so much to do, and preparing for the wood and the grounds, and so that they get together for like the whole year prior to the next event. And so after the first day of the Sundance, the next 3 days are spent in dance, prayer, and meditation. The men and women enter the circle each morning. Okay, the people, I think I say that 3 times there. I have to take a couple of those out. The people dance in a clockwise motion. The dancers resting only when really necessary. So you're supposed to dance all day, but you know what? You need to take a rest. Take a rest. Like if you need to take a breather, then that's fine. They dance under the sun and sky, leaving them to the mercy of the elements. On the 4th day, which is commonly piercing day, the sacred clowns, backwards people, and very spiritual people come out to dance and raise the spirits of the dancers. And they're called contraries. They're the sacred clowns, because they dress almost like clowns and almost like backwards people. It's just, I couldn't take my eyes off them because I've never seen anything like that in my life. It was like, they're very costumed up and like very exaggerated, like big noses and just wild looking outfits. It was just like, but it's there to distract the dancers. It's their 4th day. They've been dancing for 4 days. They're there to kind of like, take their mind off of the suffering or the pain they might be going through. Something for them to, to look at, or to, and a lot of them are contraries, backwards people. So they'll be dancing opposite to everybody else, just to kind of contrary everything else that's going on, to trying to throw everybody off a little bit, to kind of lighten the mood a bit. And for the longest time, people thought them, well, they are sacred, but people kept them private. It was something that was never to be photographed, and never to be shared outside of the Sundance. But then a few years back, a few of the elders and people who ran some of the Sundances said that, well, these are things that we should share with the community. And they actually shared some pictures of their backwards people and sacred clowns and posted them online and shared with others. And so some people are open to that and sharing more of what we do with the outside community and with others, and the community at large. And some of them are, still think it's a very sacred private thing. So again, like, it all depends on whose Sundance you're going to. Will be run differently than the next person's Sundance. And same thing with sweats and all ceremonies. Every community has a little bit of a different take on things, but it could be 95% the same, but they're just doing a little bit something unique to their own community or their own maybe personal belief system that they're passing on. But I downloaded those pictures that they had posted, and I'll share them with you here. So they dance counterclockwise and traditionally wear black and white, but I've also seen like very bright orange as well. So that's an old picture, and then some of the newer pictures. So this is what they are: dressed in ridiculous clothes and spend much of their time trying to make the dancers laugh. So even the guy on the horse is riding it backwards, a backwards person. And the picture on the left is, very, very old. So that's, that's how they more in leather back in the day, as opposed to a lot of cloth. And in today's, if you look at the picture on the right, and there's a lot of exaggerated, ears and nose, and just very, very, it was very, very distracting for sure, because I couldn't take my eyes off of them, and they behave in a wild mannerism, and they're, very, very animated dance, very distractive dance to try and take the dancer's mind off of things. So that was my my first experience with it, and it just memorized me. I was just like, wow. And then afterwards, I was seeing some of them get out of costume, and it was people that I knew. I was like, wow, I didn't know you do that. Wow. So it's, you know, people play different roles in ceremonies. And so on this day, all of the dancers that have pledged to pierce and haven't already lie down together. So you don't have to pierce if you don't want to, but you can ask to pierce. You know, you could get pierced. So they lie down together, and the presiding medicine man or the men then go to each person and cut 2 incisions in that person's chest or back. So they make 2 slits, like they cut through the meat and the skin, and then that's pulled through, and then a peg is put in through the meaty area. So you got 2 pegs that are coming out of a slit behind the slit of meat or skin that they've cut out. And sometimes it's really tough. Like sometimes they cut pretty thin, and it's, you know, it's a very little amount of meat and skin that they got to pull through. But sometimes they end up with, you know, a good chunk of meat behind it, and it's like really hard to break through. And sometimes they're dragging, you know, up to 10, 12 skulls, or they get their kids to sit on the skull to make it really tough for them to, and they're really pulling hard to break through that skin so it's a very tough sacrifice. So they can either pull from the back or pull from the front, depending on where you want to drag. Then pegs are inserted into the holes, and the sun dancers are blessed. So now you have these pegs behind the slit behind the skin of flesh and the section of skin and flesh. So this goes on for each person who pledges to pierce. So the dancers then go to the tree where there are ropes attached to the top and attach these ropes to the pegs. So the ropes are already attached to the center tree. So you're connecting to the Great Spirit through that tree and offering that flesh offering. So you're to the Great Spirit. And traditionally they dance 2 and 4 back from the tree 3 times. So they dance and come back, dance and come back, dance and come back. And then they yank back with all their strength, breaking the skin where the pegs are held in. So on the fourth time, you would just pull with all your might to break through the flesh. The skin is then cut off and placed at the base of the tree, and the sacrifice is made. So yeah, on the left, you can see where the holes that were left from someone who dragged skulls, who pierced from the back. And on the right picture, you can see the scars from the person who pierced from the chest area. There are many variations on piercing. A dancer can be pierced in the back and have buffalo skulls attached to the ropes by the pegs. Then he dances around the circle until the pegs break. A dancer can hang from the cottonwood or Sundance Lodge by his pegs until they break. Or a person can be pierced both front and back and have the pegs attached to 4 stakes placed in 4 directions. So that'd be the ultimate, would be pierced from the front and the back, but usually it's front or back. And after the flesh offering, traditional medicine is put in the wound to heal and stop the bleeding. So you imagine the bleeding going on. And so from the people I know that have done it, they've, you know, someone would come with a handful of tobacco and just press the tobacco right into the open cut and just hold it there till it stops bleeding. And in a Sioux ceremony, women dancers are never pierced because according to the Sioux religion, the woman is recognized as already enduring her pain in childbirth. This pain is considered greater than any faced during the sun dance because bearing children may cause women to die, and certainly facing death is considered the greatest challenge. So women are already considered, you know, very sacred in the culture and recognized for the pain they go through in childbirth. The Native American tribes who practice Sundance were, and here's a lot of the tribes in the Plains region. And the ones closer to here would be like the Assiniboine, Cheyenne, the Sioux, Plains Cree, the Plains Ojibwe, the Blackfoot tribe, Shoshone. Their rituals varied upon tribe to tribe. And again, like I was saying earlier, depending which community and who's running it, there's, it's a little bit of differences, but the majority of the main things are the same. For many tribes of Plains Indians whose bison hunting culture flourished during the 18th and 19th century, the Sundance was a major communal religious ceremony. The rites celebrated renewal, the spiritual rebirth of participants and their relatives, as well as the regeneration of the living earth with all its components. The ritual involving sacrifice and supplication to ensure harmony between all living things continued to be practiced by many contemporary Native Americans. So it was a giving of themselves for their life, the water and the food and the earth. They're so thankful for these things that it was a giving of themselves, a sacrifice of themselves. So again, to be the making of eagle whistles, which is usually done by wing bones of eagles. They would make whistles, and as they drag, they would blow on their whistles. And medicine pouches, and so it takes year round to prepare for the next Sundance. Dancers get things they will need to get ready: tobacco ties, sage ties, eagle bone whistles. Be ready, offering, tobacco and cloth, bedding, and giveaways. If you're a fourth-year dancer, you have to bring things to give to people that are there. So you have to do a giveaway, giveaway to other dancers and to the Sundance chief and the Sundance family. So there's always, you got to have a whole bunch of gifts on your fourth year to give to your family. And the Sundance chief prepares buffalo skulls and hides, eagle bones, patches, offering supplies, materials, and holding 4 gatherings before the Sundance. Helpers and cookers will bring food for the feast and the Sundance family. Dancers give their pledge before they dance, and teepees and grounds are prepared for the Sundance, including, chief picks the place and spot. So there's a lot to get ready, a lot to prepare, and it's, especially at the end of the 4th day, there's gonna be a lot of hungry people that haven't eaten in 4 days. So, there's gonna be a beautiful feast ready for them at the end of that. So during the Sundance, the eagle is the facilitator of communication between man and spirit. So they're blowing on that eagle whistle, it's that direct call to the creator. And then through the great spirit, through the tree in the center of the arbor, it's just the eagle is seen as courageous, swift, and strong. He has great foresight and knows everything. In the eagle, there's all the wisdom in the world. So it's through that connection to the creator, through the eagle. So there's a picture of blowing the eagle whistle while piercing and while pulling back. The eagle's feather can cure illness. During the Sundance, a medicine man may use the eagle feather for healing, first touching the feather to the sun pole and then to the patient, transferring the energy from the pole to the ill people. So it's the power of the creator through that center pole. It is the buffalo, however, that makes up the main theme of the Sundance. In various stories, it was the buffalo that began the ritual. You can see from the symbolic influences of the buffalo in the Sundance how important the animal was to Plains Indians' day-to-day life. It was the buffalo that symbolized life, for it was the buffalo that gave them the quality of life. Plains Indians relied on buffalo for their food, clothing, shelter, and most all utilities from fly swatters to children's toys. So they highly respect, and that's where that teaching is why it is respect, because these people's lives were intertwined with the buffalo, and this relationship was praised and blessed with the Sundance. The buffalo is incorporated in many ways in the Sundance. The buffalo skull is used as an altar during the Sundance. Offerings are presented to the skull. The Cheyenne stuff the eyes and nose sockets with grass, representing bountiful vegetation for the buffalo, which in turn meant healthy buffalo for the people. For others, the grass represents bringing the buffalo back to life, for grass is what gives the animal life. Buffalo songs, dances, and feasts commonly accompany the Sundance. The Sundance symbolizes a resolution with the conflict between being a people who view the buffalo as wise and powerful, even closer to the creator than humans, and having to kill and eat them to survive, making the buffalo sacred, symbolically giving new life to it, and treating it with the respect and reverence act as sort of a reconciliation. Without the buffalo, there would be death, and the Plains Indians saw that the buffalo not only provided them with physical well-being, but kept their souls alive too. They also believed that the buffaloes gave themselves to them for food, so the natural course to them would be to offer a part of themselves in return out of gratitude. Thus, the sacrifice of the dancers through fasting, thirst, and self-inflicted pain reflects the desire to return something of themselves to nature. So the buffalo gives the ultimate sacrifice to the people, for the clothing and the food and, the toys and tools and, every part of that buffalo is used. And the people don't take that for granted. They're so grateful for that they, they offer grass to the buffalo skulls in the ceremony to replenish the grass for a, healthy harvest for the next year. But they also, that they view the buffalo and the bison as sacred. So, and the bison gives its whole life to the people. So the people can't, offer their lives in return, but they offer suffering and they offer a piece of their flesh in return for the ultimate sacrifice of the buffalo. So that's why in the Sundance you see the piercing and the suffering and the offering of the flesh offering to the spirit in exchange for being thankful for the life that the buffalo give them. So that's kind of the story behind the reason of the Sundance. Self-inflicted torture has also come to symbolize rebirth. The torture represents death, then the person is symbolically resurrected. The Sundance was reborn mentally and spiritually, as well as physically, along with the renewal of the buffalo and the entire universe. So it helps them set their world right again. They're not just a society of take. They're very thankful for the life, and they want to. It's the way of them to give of themselves back in return for what has been keeping them alive for thousands of years. So during the piercing, the man thinks of the tree, realizing that it is a tree of life. Without it and others like it, man cannot live on earth. He also concentrated on its decoration, symbolizing the power of the four directions, the red, yellow, black, and white banners, plus the green and blue ones for Mother Earth and Father Sky. The man is then helped to his feet by an assistant, and a wreath of sage with 2 spiked feathers is placed on his head. The man adjusts the wreath fully, realizing the badge of honor which has been just bestowed upon him. Carefully holding on to the ropes, he takes his position again in the Sundance and gradually eases the weight of the rope onto the pain of his chest as he begins dancing again. The final movements of the Sundance include the inward dancing of the dancers. At the direction of the Sundance chief, the dancers, including those who have pierced, move towards the tree 4 times, each time touching the tree with their palms. This is the powerful moment when the tribe is deep in prayer. The prayers becomes a spiritual wind sweeping down over the back of the sun dancers, penetrating in them through their arms and hands onto the tree and upwards to the ultimate powers, to the Great Spirit. Following the fourth touch of the tree, the dancers lean back against the ropes. They are now free to seek their Sundance vision, acknowledging the spiritual and physical relationship to all that is the essence of survival. After all the dancers have finished their connection to the tree of life, they gather by the Sundance chief, who lead them from the circle which ends the dance. Then they are met by the shaking of the hands by the people who showered the men and women, their appreciation, for they know their spiritual tradition has once again been renewed. So at the end, everyone that's there and either participating or helping or just cheering on, they come and congratulate them. So after the dancers all tear free, or after the 4 days, the Sundance ends. The dancers are laid down on beds of sage to continue fasting and to recite their visions to the elders and medicine men. So they have a moment to reflect. They don't just go straight into the crowd. They gather for a moment of reflection to share, what they've been through or what they've seen or what they've heard. Or these visions may hold new songs, new dance steps, or even prophecies of the future. So these are all shared. When the camp is ready to leave, all sacred items is left in a pile by the sun pole, for they are too sacred to keep for personal use. The Sundance Lodge is then left standing for nature to do with at its will. And what's sad is, these items are too sacred for the people participating. But what had happened is the people that the colonizers would come and collect all these things and would end up in personal collections or in museums and be taken from the communities. And so that's why you see a lot of people with pipes and drums and all sorts of things that were found sacred, but they were left there for the creator, for the people, because they're considered too sacred for even themselves to have. In 1883, acting on the advice of Bureau of Indian Affairs personnel, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior criminalized the Sundance and a variety of other Indigenous religious practices. The prohibition was renewed in 1904 and reversed in 1934 by a new administration. Despite government efforts, the original forms of the Sundance were never completely repressed. And in the 21st century, Sundance remained a significant religious ritual among many Plains people. So again, it wasn't until like the 1970s where people were actually able to come out of hiding with these things and to actually start doing them in their community again. And if you look now, there's like every First Nations or every reserve has a Sundance, has a powwow gathering and a Sundance ceremony. So it's great to see a lot of these things that have been brought back. So any questions on this?
When you say in 1934 it was reversed, does that mean it was lifted? Like the prohibition was lifted in 1934?
That's what I read, but I know here in Canada that it was banned until like Indian agents were reservations, and that would have been late 60s, early 70s. So it wasn't until the actual 60s and 70s, or here in Canada anyway.
Is the fast broke overnight, or is it maintained for the full 4 days?
Pardon me?
Is the fast broken overnight, or is it maintained for the full 4 days?
Oh, it's maintained for 4 days.
So
Yeah.
no water overnight?
No, but I heard you were allowed to if you went to the sweat lodge in the evening or in the morning. I heard that you're allowed like a quarter cup or something that was passed around, and that's only if the elder allowed you to. I know some are very strict on that, but I've heard some say they were given a little sip in the sweat. So again, it's all who's ever running it, but yeah, traditionally you would be 4 days without food and water. And again, it kind of comes down to that teepee pole teachings of yesterday, of teaching your children how to fast for 4 days, and how to maintain the suffering without freaking out, like knowing that it's something you need to get through, and you're going to be okay, and then it's okay to be doing that. So they all kind of tie in many ways, teachings. So,
When a dancer drops out, like, do they join outside the circle, the community, and stay with the supportive community from the moment they drop out on?
they would, yes, yeah. And they would be asked, are you sure, you just don't need a few minutes to rest, and if they just say no, I'm done, I can't go anymore, then yeah, that's fine. They come out and join their family and friends, and still be a support system for the others that are going.
Do they sleep at
Yeah.
night?
Yeah, there'd be teepees on the grounds, and there'd be a certain section for the dancers they would have, or campers or tents, and then there'd be other sections where people can bring their motorhomes for the people that are there for moral support. They would, there's a campground area for people who want to bring a trailer or something. Then there'd be a separate quiet area for where the dancers would rest at night. Yeah, I've seen people on the fourth day just beat red and purple, like just so sunburnt and sunstroked. And then the times you see people that are muddy to the knees, and they're like sloshing through, like 4 inches of mud as they're dancing through the field, like, so you get what you get, it's just, there are no days off.
I have some friends who have sun danced, and they go for 4 years. So is that a usual?
Yeah, that sounds right. Because like we said earlier, that on the 4th year you would do a giveaway. So that's, yeah, 4 years is right. Yeah.
And what are the typical gifts that you would have to give away?
You can give fabric, ribbon shirts, ribbon skirts, jewelry. I know sometimes people come in here and they need, 10 gifts, more so maybe bone jewelry and stuff like that for part of their giveaway. Some, maybe a star blanket to the Sundance chief, like, and smaller things for the other dancers. And so
Is there like a typical amount of dances, or is it just kind of dependent on the
it's
event?
open for anyone, and who approach the Sundance community and introduce yourself and say you're interested, and they'll find you a role within the group and get you ready for the event. And again, that's something you got to have a really open mind, and maybe be really spiritually and mentally ready for that. That's just not something you can waltz in and do without thinking it over. So.
There's a Facebook group called Sundance of Women, which is women who Sundance. And so throughout the year, like Jacques said, they're doing preparations and joining together and sharing their teachings and knowledge. And people are pledging to Sundance and talking about it's what year they're in. And it's very intense, but it's really gentle at the same time.
And some people, it really helps them with their sobriety, you know, it really keeps them focused on their red road, you know, to stay focused on their goals and being that sun dancer that's, you know, drug and alcohol free and walking that road. And so it kind of gives them purpose and focus and that they might not have if they weren't part of the group, you know. So it's a support group at the same time.
Yeah. Right. Well, I guess our next two chapters are residential schools and the impact on communities
Yeah.
and reclaiming culture and identity.
They're kind of tied in. I'll start with the
Yeah.
arrival of Columbus because we need to know what happened in order to know why it needs to be where the reconciliation comes from. So I'll so we should be able to squeeze it all in. And so 1492 and the arrival of Christopher Columbus. So the information that Columbus wanted the most was, where is the gold? He had persuaded the king and queen of Spain to finance an expedition to the lands the wealth he expected would be on the other side of the Atlantic, the Indies and Asia, looking for gold and spices. For like other informed people of his time, he knew that the world was round and he could sail west in order to get to the Far East. So that was his way of trying to get to the Far East, was going around the West, not realizing how big the world actually was. So it was King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Spain was recently unified in one of the new modern nation states like France, England, and Portugal. Its population, mostly poor peasants, worked for the nobility, who were 2% of the population and owned 95% of the land. Spain had tied itself to the Catholic Church, expelled all the Jews, and driven out the Moors. Like other states of the modern world, Spain sought gold, which was becoming the new mark of wealth, more useful than the land because it could buy anything. There was gold in Asia, it was thought, and certainly silks and spices from Marco Polo and others have brought back marvelous things from their overland expeditions centuries before. So I'll probably butcher a few pronunciations along the way, so bear with me. Now that the Turks had conquered Constantinople and the Eastern Mediterranean, they controlled the land routes to Asia, a sea route was needed. So they couldn't go through the Turks, so they had to try and find a sea route to Asia. Portuguese sailors are working their way around the southern tip of Africa. Spain decided to gamble on a long sail across an unknown sea. In return for bringing back gold and spices, they promised Columbus 10% of the profits, governorship over the newfound land, and the fame that would go with the new title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He was a merchant's clerk from the Italian city of Genoa, part-time weaver, the son of a skilled weaver and an expert sailor. He set out with 3 sailing ships, the largest of which was the Santa Maria, perhaps 100 feet long, and 87 crew members. Columbus would never have made it to Asia, which was thousands of miles further away than he had calculated, imagining a smaller world. He would have been doomed by the great expanse of sea. But he was lucky. 1/4 of the way there, he came upon an unknown, uncharted land that lay between Europe and Asia, the Americas. It was early October 1492, and 33 days since he and his crew had left the Canary Islands off the Atlantic coast of Africa. Now they saw branches and sticks floating in the water, and they saw flocks of birds. These were signs of land. Then on October 12, a sailor called Rodrigo saw an early morning moon shining on white sands and cried out. It was an island in the Bahamas, the Caribbean Sea. The first man to sight land was supposed to get a yearly pension of 10,000 Maravedis for life, so about $540, but Rodrigo never got it. Columbus claimed he had seen a light the evening before and he got the reward. So even to his own men, he wasn't a good guy, you know, like he's, you know, ripping off one of his guys like that saw the land, and he's like, oh no, I saw it last night, you know, so he was even ripping off his own dudes. So as you can see, the Americas were plentiful, you know, there's tribes from the Maya to, you know, the Inuit, you know, and there's a lot of people that were already here prior to their arrival. And again, you kind of see where all the different tribes were and different groups, all the nations. I think it was said something like over 500 nations were wiped out completely. So approaching land, they were met by the Arawak Indians who swam out to greet them. The Arawaks lived in village communes, had developed agriculture, corn, yams, and cassava. They could spin and weave, but they had no horses or working animals. They had no iron, but they wore tiny gold ornaments in their ears. This was to have enormous consequences. It led Columbus to take some of them aboard the ship as prisoners because he insisted that they guide him to the source of the gold. He then sailed to what is now Cuba, and then Hispaniola, the island in which today consists of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There, bits of visible gold in the river and a gold mask presented to Columbus by a local Indian chief led to wild visions of gold fields. The Arawak men and women, naked and tawny and full of wonder, emerged from their villages onto the island beaches and swam out to get a closer look at the strange big boat. When Columbus and his sailors came ashore, they carried swords. Speaking oddly, the Arawaks ran to greet them, brought them food, water, gifts. He later wrote of this in his log. They brought us parrots, balls of cotton, and spears, and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know of them. For I showed them a sword, and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They will make fine servants. With 50 men, we could conquer them all and make them do whatever we wanted. So even at the very first visit, they're already planning on taking them as slaves. These Arawaks of the Bahama Islands were much like Indians on the mainland, who were remarkable. European observers were to say again and again for their hospitality, their belief in sharing. So over the last 2 days, we kind of went over how good they were and their belief system and their caring and sharing and love and respect. So the Europeans seen that for the first time, firsthand, and they couldn't believe it, you know, because they came from a culture of, you know, seek and destroy and conquer, you know, to a land where people weren't greedy, you know, the people there wanted to share what they had. So again, like the Europeans were like again and again, they couldn't believe their beliefs in sharing. These traits did not stand out in the Europe of the Renaissance, dominated as it was by religion of the popes, the government of kings, the frenzy for money that marked Western civilization, and his first messenger to the Americas, Christopher Columbus. Columbus wrote, as soon as I arrived in the Indies on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts. The Indians, Columbus reported, are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. To the contrary, they offer to share with anyone. He concluded his report by asking for a little help from their majesties. In return, he would bring them from his next voyage as much gold as they need and as many slaves as they ask. He was full of religious talk. Thus, the eternal God, our Lord, gives victory to those who follow his way over apparent impossibilities. Columbus called the Arawaks, the first native people he met, a gente an Dios, a people of God, or Indio, in God in Italy. And some people say that's where they get the translation for the word Indian, where the word Indian comes from, is from this translation. Here's some quotes. I am poor and naked. I am a chief of the nation. We do not want riches, but we do want to train our children right. Riches do not do us good. We do not take them with us to the other world. We do not want riches. We want peace and love. So that's a quote from Red Cloud. In Hispaniola, out of timbers from the Santa Maria, which had run aground, Columbus built a fort, the first European military base in the Western Hemisphere. He called it Navidad and left 39 crew members there with instructions to find and store the gold. He took 25 Indian prisoners and put them aboard his 2 remaining ships. At one part of the island, he got into a fight with Indians who refused to trade as many bows and arrows as he and his men wanted. They were run through with swords and bled to death. Then the Nina and the Pinta set sail for Spain. So he built his fort, left 37 guys behind, and he went back to Spain. When the weather turned cold, the Indian prisoners began to die, and only 8 survived. Columbus's report to the court in Madrid was extravagant. He insisted he had reached Asia. It was Cuba and an island off the coast in China. His descriptions were part fact and part fiction. Hispaniola is a miracle. Mountains and hills, plains and pastures are both fertile and beautiful. The harborage are unbelievably good, and there are many wide rivers in which the majority contain gold. There are many spices and great mines of gold and other metals. So he created a nice big story when he returned, Because of Columbus's exaggerated report and promises, his second expedition was given 17 ships and more than 1,200 men, guns, and guard dogs. So now they're coming back on a mission. The aim was clear: slaves and gold. They went from island to island in the Caribbean, taking Indians as captives. But as word spread of the European intent, they found more and more empty villages. On Haiti, they found that the sailors left behind at Fort Navidad had been killed in battle with the Indians after they had roamed the islands in gangs looking for gold, taking women and children as slaves for sex and labor. So the men he left behind were going around taking women and children for sex. Now, from his base in Haiti, Columbus sent expedition after expedition into the interior. They found no gold fields, but had to fill up the ships returning to Spain with some kind of dividend. In the year 1495, they went on a great slave run, rounded up 1,500 Arawak men, women, and children, and put them in pens guarded by Spaniards and dogs. They picked the 500 best specimens to load onto ships. Of those 500, 200 died en route. The rest arrived alive in Spain and were put up for sale by the Arcadian of the town, who reported that although the slaves were naked as the day they were born, they showed no more embarrassment than animals. Columbus later wrote, "Let us in the name of the Holy Trinity go on sending all the slaves that can be sold." But too many slaves died in captivity, and so Columbus, desperate to pay back dividends to those who had invested, had to make good his promise to fill the ships with gold. In the province of Siaco on Haiti, where he and his men imagined huge gold fields to exist, they ordered all persons 14 years and older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given a copper token to hang around their necks. Indians found without a copper token had their hands cut off and bled to death. The Indians had been given an impossible task. The only gold around was bits of dust garnered from the streams. So they fled, they were hunted down with dogs and were killed. Trying to put together an army of resistance, the Arawaks faced Spaniards who had armor, muskets, swords, and horses. When the Spaniards took prisoners, they hanged them or burned them to death. Among the Arawaks, mass suicide began with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians on Haiti were dead. When it became clear there was no gold left, the Indians were taken as slave labor on huge estates. They were worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. In the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 Indians left. By 1550, there were 500. A report of the year 1650 showed that none of the original Arawaks or their descendants left on the island. The only source of information about what happened on the island after Columbus came is Bartholomew de las Casas, who as a young priest participated in the conquest of Cuba. For a time, he owned a plantation in which Indian slavery worked, but he gave that up and became a passionate critic of Spanish cruelty. Las Casas described Columbus's journal and in his 50s began a multi-volume history of the Indies. In it, he described the Indians. They are agile, he said. They can swim long distances, especially the women. They are not completely peaceful because they do battle from time to time with other tribes, but their casualties seem small and they fight when they are individually moved to do so and not because of some grievances, not on the orders of the captain or kings. Women in Indian society were treated so well as to startle the Spaniards. Las Casas describes sex relationships. Marriage laws are non-existent. Men and women alike choose their mates and leave them as they please without offense, jealousy, or anger. They multiply in great abundance. Pregnant women work to the last minute, give birth almost painlessly. Up the next day, they bathe in the river and are as clean and healthy as before giving birth. They cover their shameful parts with leaves or cotton cloth. Although on the whole, Indian men and women look upon total nakedness with as much casualness as we look upon a man's head or his hand. The Indians, Las Casas says, have no religion, at least no temples. They live in large communal bell-shaped buildings, housing up to 600 people at one time, made of very strong wood and roofed with palm leaves. They prize bird feathers of various colors, beads made of fish bones, and green and white stones in which they adorn their ears and lips. They put no value on gold and other precious things. They lack all manner of commerce, neither buying nor selling, and they rely exclusively on their natural environment for maintenance. They are extremely generous with their possessions and by the same token, covet the possessions of their friends and expect the same degree of liberty. So they're seeing firsthand how generous the people in the communities were, and even while being attacked, they were still being generous. Las Casas would first urge replacing Indians with black slaves, thinking they were strong and would survive, but later relented when he saw the effects on the blacks. Tells about the treatment of the Indians by the Spaniards. It's a unique account and deserves to be quoted at length. Endless testimonies prove the mild and pacific temperament of the natives, but our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Small wonder then if they tried to kill one of us now and then. So they were peaceful even while being attacked. There was just. The admiral, it is true, was blind as those who came after him, and he was so anxious to please the king that he committed irreparable crimes against the Indians. Las Casas tells how the Spaniards grew more conceited by the day and after a while refused to walk any distance. They rode the back of Indians if they were in a hurry or were carried on hammocks by Indians running in relays. In this case, they also had Indians carry large leaves to shade them from the sun and others to fan them with goose wings. The Spaniards thought nothing of knifing Indians by the 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off of them to test the sharpness of their blades. Las Casas tells how two of these so-called Christian men met two Indian boys one day, each carrying a parrot. They took the parrots and for fun beheaded the boys. The Indians' attempts to defend themselves failed, and when they ran off into the hills, they were found and killed. So Las Casas reports they suffered and died in the mines and other labors in desperate silence, knowing not a soul in the world to whom they could turn for help. He described their work in the mines. Mounds are stripped from top to bottom and bottom to top 1,000 times. They dig, split rocks, move stones, and carry dirt on their backs to wash it in the river, while those who wash gold stayed in the water all the time with their backs bent so constantly it breaks them, and water invades the mines. The most atrocious task of all was to dry the mines by scooping up handfuls of water and throwing it up outside. After each 6 or 8 months working in the mines, which was the time required for each crew to dig enough gold for melting, up to a third of the men died. While the men were sent many miles away in the mines, the wives remained to work the soil, forced into the excruciating job of digging and making thousands of hills for cassava plants, which is a root plant, third largest carb behind corn and rice. Thus, husband and wives were together only once every 8 or 10 months, and when they met, they were so exhausted and depressed on both sides, they ceased to procreate. And as for the newly born, they died early because their mothers, overworked and famished, had no milk to nurse them. And for this reason, while I was in Cuba, 7,000 children died in 3 months. Some mothers even drowned their babies of sheer desperation. In this way, husbands died in the mines, wives died at work, and children died from lack of milk. And in a short time, this land, which was so great, so powerful and fertile, was depopulated. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature, and now I tremble as I write this. In addition to putting the natives to work as slaves in his gold mines, Columbus also sold sex slaves to his men, some as young as age 9. Columbus and his men also raided villages for sex and sport. In the year 1500, Columbus wrote, 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it's very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go around looking for girls. Those from the age of 9 to 10 are now in demand. So it's just a sick society of just brutal what they were doing to the population there. In the early years of Columbus' conquest, there were butcher shops throughout the Caribbean where Indian bodies were sold as dog food. And I've heard of that from elders that said that, you know, a lot of Indigenous people don't have hair on their bodies, and they're actually cooked and sold as long pigs in butcher shops in Europe. So I've actually heard that from elders, that story. There's also a practice known as the infernal chase or manhunt, in which Indians were hunted by war dogs. These dogs also wore armor and been fed human flesh, were a fierce match for the Indians. Live babies were also fed to these war dogs as sport, sometimes in front of horrified parents. See, I never heard this in my history in high school at all, you know, like just it was through research and stories that I've heard that I've come across the knowledge. And yeah, he was made to sound like some kind of hero in the history books. After a multitude of complaints against Columbus about his mismanagement of the island, a royal commissioner arrested Columbus in 1500 and brought him back to Spain in chains. Though he was stripped of his governor title, he was pardoned by the king, who then subsidized a 4th voyage. So he wasn't even punished for it. He was just like, we'll take your title away. Here you go back and get some more, you know, like. Native women were carrying British men on her back in 1900. So it's a colonism consumed in one photo. From 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. What Columbus did to the Arawaks in the Bahamas, Cortez did to the Aztecs in Mexico, Pizarro to the Incas in Peru, and the English settlers of Virginia and Massachusetts to the Powhatans and the Pequots. Samuel Eliot Morison of Harvard, the Harvard historian, was the most distinguished writer in Columbus, the author of multi-volume biography, and was himself a sailor who retraced Columbus's route across the Atlantic. In his popular book, Christopher Columbus Mariner, written in 1954, he tells about the enslavement and the killings, the cruel policy initiated by Columbus and persuaded by his successors, resulting in complete genocide. Columbus Day was conceived by the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal organization in the 1930s, because they wanted a Catholic hero. After President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the day in law as a federal holiday in 1937, the rest has been history. So that's where Columbus Day comes from. So the trade between Indigenous and Europeans, the impact of three factors: non-human organisms, what Alfred Crosby called the Columbian Exchange, microbes, plants, animals introduced from Europe and Africa to the Western Hemisphere. Trade, European ways of valuing commodities altered Native American economy and ecology. You know, we would never look at furs the same way again, because all of a sudden now there's a price on just the fur and certain animals, the meat. And settlement patterns, permanent European settlements in Northern America reshaped land in accordance to the old world ideas. And so instead of, you know, moving around and setting up your village during different times of the year, now there were settlements. You know, there's houses and farms and communities of Europeans that were setting up permanent residence. In the beginning, the colonial period, the chief article the tribesmen had to offer was furs: beaver, mink, otter, marten, fox, buffalo, deer, moose, elk, etc. But they also traded on a lower volume and often privately all sorts of things, from seeds like for corn, beans, and squash, pemmican, handcrafts, tanned buckskins, baskets, fresh game. In return, they received simple European goods which they themselves couldn't produce. Woven cloth, woolen were very popular as blankets and bolt goods, glass beads, pigments for paint, small metal houseware such as kettles and pots, steel knives, tomahawks, certain food stuff, and above all, guns, powder, shots, and intoxicating liquors. At first, it was chiefly rum. In the southern East States, there's also a very brisk commons in deerskin. The Cherokee were particularly productive of these for many years. Native Americans provided a great deal of ready-to-eat food: corn, beans, squash, pumpkins, dried meat, fish, acorns, berries, etc., as they were better farmers than the Europeans up until the 20th century yields. They also trade deer hides more than anything else, with bison hides a close second for their broad utility in apparel, harnesses, footwear, packs and bags, rawhide strips as the equivalent later on a baling wire, or bungee cords as universal fasteners and straps, and material for light and heavy coats. The edible and medicinal plants known to the local Indians are also very high value, literally life and death products in many cases. So they tap into our medicinal knowledge, our plant medicines as well. The Europeans traded them rum, particularly as they kept coming back for it, while most physical goods were quickly sat on. Fabrics, wool, linen, cotton, canvas, silk, generally dyed in color, not locally available, needles and threads, steel knives, cast iron cooking pots, iron traps for all sorts of animals. Most trappers were actually Native Americans. Firearms of any sorts and vintage, gunpowder and lead for bullet making over a campfire, gun flints, English preferably, French had lower value, refined cane sugar, wheat flour, dried fruit, glass beads made in Europe, India, and Africa, tomahawks and hatchets, axes for tree felling, horses, cattle, candles, etc. Among the items such in demand by the Plains tribes were coffee, sugar, and hawks' bells, or little metal bells which they sew into their best clothing, which were particularly coveted by the women. Any successful white trapper outfitted his women with them. It was at this time too that trade whiskey, a rather vile and extremely powerful concoction intended to satisfy the tribesmen' demand for a kick, equivalent to a pop on the head with a war club, replaced rum as the liquor of choice. It was during this time the men in the village would be blacked out for days and fight and at times kill each other. The women and children would leave and hide in the woods for weeks at a time until it was safe to return. One's own land would become trapped out, but since one had these weapons, one can now invade deeper inland and trap your neighbor's furs, who would have no choice but to fight you at the same time. He's trapping for his furs to trade for weapons, and that chain of dominoes just kept knocking deeper inwards. Columbus unloaded horses, cows, pigs, wheat, barley, sugarcane. These animals took over local environments in the Caribbeans. Pigs ate iguanas, shellfish, sweet potatoes that they never had seen before and thrived in the wild. Cattle took to the grasslands, more lush than in the old world. Horses also underwent massive population explosion in the wild due to the abundance of grassland. Rats, dogs, and cats also went wild in new environment. The introduction of these species helped Spanish and later conquests. The horses and meat that Cortez used to conquer Mexico came from Cuba, where they thrived in the wild. Animals, not only ones who liked diet of the New World food, Europeans brought maize and potatoes back from Western Hemisphere to Europe, where their superior caloric value made them attractive new crops to plant in place, as such as Ireland totally transformed local foodways, ecosystems, and local and social relationships. Potatoes traveled to Spain, then through Basque fishermen to Ireland. The other thing that crossed the ocean blue from Columbus was disease. Columbus landed in Hispaniola Island, shared the Haitian Dominican Republic in 1492. By 1600, all of natives were wiped out. When natives died, Spain turned to Africa for labor, totally remaking Caribbean population so that the island is now virtually all Black. Overall, between 1492 and 1900, native populations declined by 90%, while European population increased by 444%. Why were Native Americans so susceptible to disease? Why was the exchange of germs between Europe and the Americans so unequal? Why didn't American disease spread back to Europe and wipe out most of the European population rather than the other way around? The answer in short is that Europeans, because they farmed with livestock and lived in concentrated settlements, evolved nastier germs. Agriculture supported higher densities of population than hunting and gatherers. So farmers tend to live in concentrated settlements where crowd and disease thrived. These are germs that evolved to spread quickly, be acute, to leave antibodies, and remain in human populations once they get there. These type of germs cannot survive in small bands of hunter-gatherers. They died out before they can spread. The same rule about crowd disease applied to animals. Epidemic diseases spread quickly in herd animals such as cows and pigs. Once humans domesticated these animals, disease quickly jumped to humans. So we have the rider pest, the cattle to measles, tuberculosis, cattle to humans, cowpox, cattle to smallpox, influenza, pigs to human, pertussis, pigs and dogs to humans, the whooping cough, malaria from chickens to humans. Native people in the Americas did not have many domestic animals, and thus germs and antibodies did not co-evolve here, and they never developed resistance. Nor did nasty diseases evolve here that Europeans hadn't been exposed to before. Columbus reintroduced pathogens that have been devastating to humans and the rest of the world. Smallpox, measles, whooping coughs, bubonic plague, malaria, yellow fever, dysentery. And Native American populations, unlike those in Europe, did not have enough adults living through disease to propagate enough children to survive the disease, grow to adulthood, and continue the race. Native American death rate from disease is a third to half of the population. These diseases killed millions of Native Americans, terrorized survivors, and paralyzed normal society and political relations. Note that disease spread along trade routes ahead of the Spanish, French, and English settlements and contributed to the impression that parts of the New World were empty. Note that Native Americans did trade with one another before European contact, myth of self-sufficient Indian tribes, but their surpluses were circulated as part of ceremonial exchanges, not shipped off to seemingly insatiable European market economy. So, at powwows and gatherings, the buffalo hides, deer skins, beavers, shells, pemmican, and other goods suddenly took on new meaning for Native Americans. Once the Micmacs began trading with the French, they could not look at animals in the same way. So they lost a lot of that spiritual connection, so now they weren't using every part of the animal. Now they were killing animals for their fur to trade with the French or the British in exchange for guns and ammunition and food, and so that changed that whole meaning for many people. Changes in Native American perceptions of environment resulted in changes in hunting practices that affected ecosystems long before permanent European settlement. European trade also meant more warfare among Native Americans as they compete to trade with French and the English to gain advantages over their traditional enemies. So now they're siding with, you know, different sides of the army, and they're fighting each other. In New England, land permanently brought under cultivation and intensely worked rather than seasonal use of lands by Native Americans. As English population quickly surpassed Native American ones, more people trying to get a living out of a smaller geographical area. And here's a look of how much land the Indians obtained after it all. So the Indian reserves in Canada are 0.2% of the land, and Canada owns 99.8% of the land. It's a little better in the States. And again, a quote from so before the arrival of the white man, there were no locks on their doors, no private property, no sense of possessions, no beggars, no jails, no police, no hunger, no banks, no money currency, no rich or poor, and no population, yet they claimed we were uncivilized. So it's a heavy topic, but it's important to know this information moving forward, you know, like, so people can kind of realize what actually happened and why there's a need for reconciliation. And
Mhm. So we're at 142 right now, and we have 2 parts to get through. So what kind of break do we want to take here?
we can start.
10? Okay, let's do 10, and then we'll be back. Okay, and then we have 2 big parts to get through. Okay, thanks.
The last stretch.
Yeah, and this is the big stuff. I hope we have enough time and for discussion and everything.
Oh, yeah, it is just, there's one section left and it combines the colonization and residential school and reclaiming. It's all kind of all in the same last.
Yeah. Yeah, heavy stuff, heavy stuff.
Stuff you would never heard in school, that's for sure.
Hmm.
Looks nice outside. Had to peek
Yeah.
out the window.
Yeah, I just stepped outside. It's lovely. It's gorgeous. What a lovely, lovely. My computer says it's only -5 or something.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Well, +2 for Sunday,
Bonkers.
0 for Monday, +1 for Tuesday and Wednesday. Dang. Bring on the springtime. I'll take it.
Game here.
Pardon me?
They had the football game here. I have no
Yeah.
idea what the weather's supposed to be like in Hamilton, but
I
Yeah.
think
I
0.
can't imagine it would be much better than that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the game. Hope we can do it. We should, though, you think?
Okay, well, we are at 1:52. It is 10 minutes. So I'm going to say, Jacques, just start.
Okay.
It's all being recorded. So if anyone has missed anything, oh, and here they are anyways. So.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's going to do a couple of one-pagers on a few different wars that happened that kind of more towards our area. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but a couple of one-pagers in certain areas. So this is kind of what we went through already. So even while being attacked, they're told only to fight in self-defense, and basically they only had their canes and their cane bow and arrows. So here's the first example of the peace treaty. So after 14 years, when they couldn't kill all the Arawaks, they were unable to catch and kill the 80 sub-chiefs. So they offered them a peace treaty. So that was the first offering of a treaty. So that they accepted. So when the chiefs arrived at the peace meeting, they were ambushed and killed by the Spanish. So that was the first example of let's sign a peace treaty. So we'll do a little bit of a throughout history. So in 1539, Hernando de Soto landed in Tampa Bay in the spring with a 600-man army, 200 mounted on horses and attack dogs, and searched for land passage to India. So they're still looking for India. Their goal was to find gold, slaves, and food by force along the way. They had over 30 slaves shackled by the neck that they dragged along. In 1540, they reached southern Carolina and the ancient mound builders. They pillaged graves and burned down villages for gold, gems, and pearls. In northern Alabama, they walked through 12 villages in one day, and they burned on all the villages. So it shows you how densely populated it was here already. You know, like if you can walk through 12 villages in one day, that's a pretty populated area. So in 1541, they reached the Mississippi River, eastern Louisiana, Texas, and made it to the Gulf of Mexico by 1543. So now it's 20 years later, and they're sending a new expedition, but they were going to colonize the land they explored 20 years earlier. So when they first went through it, they noticed how beautiful the land was. So now 20 years later, they want to colonize the land. So instead of finding the original villages, like 12 villages in one day and all the people that they came across, so instead of finding thriving villages, they found everything overgrown and only pockets of survivors. Along with the attack 20 years earlier, the Indians were also hit with mumps, measles, smallpox, and chickenpox. They had no immunity to these diseases and died by the thousands. Whole communities were wiped out. So you can see the impact on not only the war, but the diseases were huge. So now further north, 1576 in Baffin Island, Inuit. English sea captain Martin Frobisher was looking for the northern passage to the Orient. You know, they're still obsessed with getting to the Orient. This stretch is now known as Frobisher Bay. So when they were there, kayaks came out to meet the ships. The Inuit offered them fish, furs, sealskin, clothing, and friendship. They told him they could help them cross. So he sent 5 of his men ahead in kayaks with the Inuit as scouts. He told them not to go out of sight, but he couldn't keep up to them. And when they're out of sight, he thought they were kidnapped. So he kidnapped an Inuit man as proof and returned to England. So just because he couldn't see the guys in front of him, he panicked, kidnapped an Inuit man, and took off to England. So the Inuit man committed suicide on the ship by biting his tongue in half. So Martin returned the next year with an army. That seems to be the normal, you know. It's like, oh, they attacked a group of 18 people in a camp. They kidnapped a woman, a man, and a baby and returned to England. Shortly after arrival, they all died of illness. The story was the 5 men lived with the Inuit in harmony and decided to sail away one day and were never seen again. So 1600, the Atlantic coast had over 100 Indian nations. They had corn, squash, beans, fruit, vegetables, fishing, hunting, land, villages, people living in harmony with the land and each other. So in 1607, English Captain John Smith arrived in present-day Virginia to set up the colony of Jamestown. The Indians watched and waited. They believed there could be benefits to trading with them. The first winter, many of them died. They were Algonquin, and the chief was Chief Powhatan, and his daughter was Pocahontas. They traded food for copper, which they would use for tools and weapons. In 1609, John Smith came back with an army and took over the village and the land. And the chief said, "Why take by force when you can have it with love?" You know, even while being attacked for their land, they said, "Why are, you know, we'll give it to you, you know, we'll give it with love." In 1613, Pocahontas was kidnapped, taught to read, speak, and write English, and taught Christianity, and ended up marrying her captor, John Rolfe. They fought for 4 years. In 1617, she died in England, and her dad gave up power and soon died after. In 1620, England, in the search for developing more colonies and farming land, arrived at Plymouth Rock. This was the traditional land of the Wampanoag tribe and Chief Massasoit. The Pilgrims set up a colony of 100 people. Half died the first winter. In exchange for helping them to survive in the new land, they signed a treaty for peace and protection. They taught them where to hunt and fish, what to plant and grow gardens. In 1621, in the fall, they celebrated together in ceremony of thanks, which they taught to the pilgrims. The first Thanksgiving for the pilgrims, the Indians did this since the beginning of time. For 3 days and nights, they feasted, danced, prayed, played games, and had contests. They ate deer, wild turkey, geese, fish, lobster, fruit, vegetables, and much more than they had harvested over the summer. There was peace for 40 years. So that was the first Thanksgiving ever with the pilgrims. But the First Nations were doing that since the beginning of time, celebrating the harvest and being ready for winter. So feasting is Indigenous. Give thanks to the land. In 1662, by then there were 50,000 English residents surrounding them. Now there's a new leader at Plymouth Rock. They started converting the Indians in prayer towns, arresting them for hunting and fishing on Sundays. They were arrested for using medicine and for ceremonies. They were sent to death for denying the Christian religion. The treaties were broken and people were killed. Men, women, and children were burnt alive in their wigwams, gathered and sold into slavery. So there was peace for 40 years until a new leader came in and then just went back to the old ways. But that was the first recording of being killed for practicing your religion. And there's some people never forget the biggest genocide in history didn't happen in Nazi Germany. It happened on American soil. 100 million Native Americans were slaughtered and lost their homeland. So I saw this kind of related to. So he'll kind of get into more modern time. So it was very legal and fruitful for killing Indians back in the day. So here's an ad from the States here somewhere. The state rewards for dead Indians has been increased to $200 for every redskin sent to purgatory. This sum is more than the dead bodies of all the Indians east of the Red River are worth. So this would be more along the Red River. Here's an old news article. The Tears of Indians being the historical and true account of the cruel massacre and slaughters of above 20 million of innocent people committed by the Spaniards. As an article from 1656. And if you fought back, you were wanted. You were a bad person for fighting back. So wanted dead or alive is an ad from 1874. So now we'll start talking about reservations and treaties. So they could not catch or kill everyone, so they offered treaties, which is a promise for surrender. So they're at a point now they couldn't kill everybody, as much as they tried. So they offered treaties, a promise for surrender. They were put on reservations, which in most part was land that wasn't good for hunting, farming, and land that no one else wanted. So there's an old Ojibwe word for reservation, which is basically translate to useless land. An elder was telling me that it's no good for anything, it's just dead land that nobody else wanted. So that's where the reservations were set up. Each reservation was assigned an Indian agent by Indian Affairs. You are not allowed to leave the reserve without the permission of the agent until the 1600s. The agent had to give passes and time curfews if they would even let you leave. They could also kick people off the reserve. So they were governed still in their own reservations. You couldn't leave without permission. You couldn't, they were watched so you couldn't practice your culture. They were. There's even then they were still like being in a jail. So you couldn't go hunting, there was no food, no jobs. So they couldn't survive without food. So many would go to the Indian agent office and beg for food. So as part of the treaty, Each person was given an annual $5 treaty payment. And at the time, that was the equivalent to an acre of land, a large bag of flour, lard, beans, and blankets. The amount was never raised with the cost of inflation, and now the government says it's a symbolic gesture. So now they refuse to raise that amount and said it was a symbolic gesture. By today's inflation, that amount should now be over $8,000 annually for each First Nations person, instead of the here's $5, like that's almost insulting. People said it cost them more to take the bus to go get their treaty payment than it costs to actually get their treaty payment. And a lot of people said that would fix a lot of issues if if it was done right by today's standards. And so their main food source was the bison. So now over 50 million bison were killed, leaving approximately about 100 left. This was done to hurt the indigenous population by destroying their main food source. But they also claimed they did it because the railway, they didn't want to be hitting bison, but it really destroyed the food source of the First Nations. There's even a story that someone back in the day from Ottawa went to Alberta, and the Blood tribe were basically eating grass to stay alive. Like they were just like the whole tribe was just eating grass. Like that's all they could find of any substance. There was no bison left. It was just they're resorting to, begging and eating grass. They were promised land, food, money, education, and medical treatment in exchange for living in harmony. Once all the bisons were killed, they had no food and reluctantly accepted the treaties. So here they are. Okay, you know what? We signed the treaties. We're going to live in harmony. Things are going to be good. And all of a sudden, they were given blankets and clothing infested with smallpox. Tens of millions more died. So it's like, hey, we're all good now. You can trust us. Let's get along together. Here's some blankets and some clothing for you. And that's where that old lady, that elder I was talking to, said that she would never trust government and schools and the police again, because I guess that kind of stuff happened to her. Like all her childhood was like, every time they were promised something, it was just a trick to attack them even further. Like all their sacred and traditional items and practices were taken away. So again, you were punished for, playing the drum, singing, talking your language. It's just, they'd have to go deep into the woods at night to practice their culture and ceremonies. They're not allowed to practice culture between 1873 and 1970. So it wasn't until 1970 that they're actually able to play the drum in their house, in their own house or in front of their own house. Look at all the buffalo skulls. There's 50 million buffalo were killed. You can see the person standing in front of it and on top of it, and how long that it stretches. And all the furs apparently were used by the government, by the RCMPs for their jackets, and then shipped back to France or England. And many Métis had it even worse. They weren't accepted by either society. They were called half-breeds. You weren't allowed on the reservation, and they didn't want you in the white colonies. You were the, and they ended up living in the ditches between the two and became known as the road allowance people. So they lived in between the reserves and the white colonies. So they kind of lived in the ditches or in the woods. And so most lost their identity. Wait here. So people became dependent on government, no jobs on the reserve, little hunting, no opportunity, isolated, and children being taken away. Most lost their identity. and many turned to alcohol and drugs. They were angry. So there's that story about, the men blacking out, and the women would actually have to go with the children into the woods with the, for not wanting to be killed as the men were blacked out. They hated the church and government for what they did to them. They were forced to learn the European history in the school system, which conflicted with their tradition and their history. And then today, you look at people in reserves are forced to pay high prices for food, clothing, alcohol, and supplies. And a lot of people in northern communities, they can't afford alcohol, so they would turn to glue, gas, solvents to numb the pain. And you hear a lot of that up north, people melting records to sniff the melting records, and gas rags to, it inflicted such pain and such suffering onto the communities. So in 1876 came the Indian Act. So they weren't recognized as equal people. So they had a set of rules they had to live by on the reserve, which is still enforced to this day. It says how a reserve in the band can operate. It says who is and isn't an Indian, imposes on Indigenous people by the Canadian government. It's a source of discontent among Native people to this day. And the government actually is the one who tells you who is an Indian and who isn't. There's a Bill C-31, which gives you status. Then Bill C-32, you're still an Indian, but you're a non-status. So all of a sudden, they're making it so your children become non-status. So, in 10, 15 years, there's going to be so little status Indians left as the definition by the government. So there's no system in place where the Indigenous people are actually the ones like creating the system of who's, and they have a membership, but based on your treaty rights or whatever is based on your status, and you pass your status on to your children, who then cannot pass that on to their children. So it's a whole kind of a mess right now on how they're, the people should be the ones who dictate who is a membership of their band. And they weren't recognized in the Constitution until 1982 into Section 35. And we were all lumped into one category and called Aboriginal. So they took the First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis people of Canada. So we're going to recognize you as one group, and we're going to call you Aboriginal. And then the residential school impacted kids between the age of 4 and 16. So if you were between that age, they would come into your community and pluck all the kids. In 1867, churches and government were already involved. So in residential school, you were stripped of your culture, your language, your family, your ceremonies, which they called them devil's practices. You would lose your clothing, your hair, etc. They were raised by priests and nuns who don't have kids and don't know how to raise them. They were sexually abused, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually abused. Very few were loved or cared for. Once they left the school, they had to deal with the trauma that they went through, and many found comfort in drugs and alcohol to numb the pain. Once they started having children, it was realized that many didn't possess parenting skills, as they were mostly shown abuse growing up. Then they started abusing their children in the same way they were abused. And that's continued that cycle. So one of the oldest forms of child abuse is forced assimilation. So you can see what the child looked like prior to going to residential school to how they were dressed once they were there. So their clothing, their braids, their language, you'd be whipped you're beaten for speaking your language. So this is a picture from 1874 from a residential school in Saskatchewan. An old letter, so a daily reminder that in 1952, you could buy a native child for $10. government even had a book for them. It was just like, I think it's 1934 or something on the bottom there. So there's about 130 residential schools across Canada. The last one closed in, what do you think?
1996.
Yes, 1996 in the school in Saskatchewan. The last residential school operated by the Canadian government, Gordon Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan, was closed in 1996. But it doesn't end there. The 60s scoop. From the 1960s until the late 1980s, the government went to reserves and communities, scooping up children of Aboriginal people and putting them in foster homes, in most cases without the consent of family or the band. So it was just like, there's no stop to the punishment that was coming. The treatment has left devastating effect on families. Now, it put an end, it put a stop to all the teachings we did in the first 2 days on how families were raised and children were raised. You know, it put a blockage to that. You know, they couldn't raise their children in a good way because they didn't have access to their children. You know, and then they wounded them as children into wounded adults. You know, who grew up with that pain and not knowing the true love that came from the teachings. And to this day, we now have more children in care of CFS than we ever had. So these effects are snowballing to this very day. You know, it was, and you know, I know people that have 8 kids and don't have possession of one of them. You know, and some of it's their fault. You know, for drugs and alcohol, but some of it is, you know, they should have a right to have their children. And there's a change in that now. So there's like First Nations are having their own child and family services, like you know, the Peguis Child and Family, Saugeen. So now they're starting to bring the children back into the community to be, you know, fostered or raised by family or family members if it can't be done properly by the parents. You know, so this is part of that reconciliation, is to change these things instead of, you know, government taking the children and putting them into non-Indigenous families, you know. And it became a business, you know, like people were collecting big money as foster parents. Like I had a guy from the streets, you know, he was rough and dirty, and they'd come in and visit sometimes. And so he's talking to me about, he was part of that 60 scoop, and he said him and his brother and younger sister were given to a farmer in Lake Francis. And he said the guy would shoot at their feet to make them do things. He had a gun, and he would, like, you know, shoot at them to go and, you know, go milk cows or go and do this. And meanwhile, he said the guy was sexually abusing their younger sister. So they're being shot at, the daughter's being raped, and they ran away. He said they tried to run away to Winnipeg, and they were like hiding through the woods. There's a lot of fields and woods and between Lake Francis and Winnipeg. So they're like, you know, running through the fields whenever they had an opening. And they said they were caught by the RCMP. So on the way back to the farm, they told the RCMP that this guy is shooting at them and, you know, raping the sister. And he says the RCMP just took them back to the farm and said, here's your kids, you know, just didn't even question him about any of the stuff the kids brought up with them, you know. And he says, you know, he's been kind of just traumatized and living on the streets all his life, you know. So a lot of, you know, so we don't know the backstory to a lot of people that we see that are down and out, you know, like it's just. So this brings us to where we are today. You know, there was in the 60s and 70s, there's only a handful of elders that remembered what their culture was before colonization and the little bit that their family passed on to them, you know. And once 3 or 4 generations passed through residential school, there was little or nothing left of the old ways. And this is what government wanted, you know. They wanted to take the Indian out of the child, you know, and that was the goal of the residential school. It was assimilate, have nothing left of the old ways. And we're lucky we had a handful of elders that held on to the traditional values and the teachings and the ceremonies. And so, and then they're trying to pass these kids through the European school system, and you're beating somebody and then you're trying to teach them at the same time, it's just like, so education, we have a very high rate of dropouts. Parents don't have education or didn't want, they're just forced to, so they can't help the students. Parents hated the school system based on what they went through. And we make up close to 80% of the prison population. So with no education, your income potential goes down and you do what you have to for money. But now we're kind of getting an awareness of we're running our own schools and running our own programs and running our own daycares and running our own child and family services. So we're starting to develop the economics of staying in school. We can create the lifestyle you want now. Like, you're not being beaten and raped or killed anymore. You're just, now you're being treated with your culture in school, and you have access to things. And so now and today we have more university graduates now than we ever had in history. We have big groups of university graduates every year. So we can never go back to the old ways of life, but we need to identify who we were, who we are, so our children today can know who they are, so we can instill that culture in the kids. And, we'll never go back to living in teepees and off the land, but, we can still carry our values and our teachings and our spirituality with us to connect to our ancestors. We have to adapt to modern society, but now we practice our culture and ceremonies freely for the first time in hundreds of years. And nowadays, a lot more people are aware of the injustices we've been through, like there's never a talk about what had happened and, why things were the way they were. And that's kind of why I went through the wars with you, was to, actually show you how harsh it was and how destructive it was to the Indigenous population. But now we have a lot more professionals and doctors, lawyers, business owners, etc. And the culture and traditions are returning. I think I brought this up in the first day, but in 1969, the Friendship Center wanted to have a powwow and they couldn't find a drum group or any dancers. They had to bring them in from Saskatchewan and Ontario. Now we have numerous drum groups in every community and thousands of dancers. We realize we can never go back to the old ways of life before 1942, but we can have our value system which identifies who we were and are. The Aboriginal population is the fastest growing. In 2016, Canadian consensus, 84,305 people in Winnipeg identifies Indigenous, and that's 12.2% of the population. And in Manitoba, 18% identifies Indigenous, and that number is growing every year. So we are making a larger percentage of the population. And again, some quotes I threw at the end here. Only when the last tree has died, the last river has been poisoned, and the last fish has been caught, we will realize we cannot eat money. So I think we've all heard that one before. And Chief Joseph, he was promised peace so many times, and his people were attacked every time he believed it. And then finally, at the end, he gave up. And hear me, my chiefs, I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. He just kind of, he was promised peace so many times, and it was just always a ploy to kill more of them. They came with the Bible and their religion. They stole our land and crushed our spirits. And now they tell us we should be thankful for the Lord for being saved. And a lot of people, Indigenous people, really hate the religions for what had happened, and some embrace it and take it in as their own. So there's two schools on that. Some want nothing to do with religion, and some stand by it. So it's each their own. And here, this is, it was encouraged to kill for money. It was $5 for every severed head in 1855, 25 cents for a scalp. 25 cents for a scalp, man, woman, or child in the state of California. And in both 1851 and 52, California paid out $1 million. So at 25 cents a pop for $1 million, that was a lot of people taken out. So one of the first acts of the California legislature when it entered the union was to offer a bounty on Indian scalps. So it was very, very legal back in the day too. And again, they could see why men did not care for each other the way our people did. They would take everything from each other if they could. Some had more of everything than they could use, while crowds of people had nothing at all. This could not be better than the old ways of my people. So the old ways of was sharing every single thing they had with the community as a whole, and instead of the concept of greed or the, you know, there's, again, that's something that and here's something, an interesting prophecy. When the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come onto the earth from many colors, classes, creeds, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They will be known as the warriors of the rainbow. And that incorporates all the people in the world coming together to save the earth. So there's that prophecy of, you know, it doesn't matter what color you are, you know, you can follow you can believe in these teachings, and you can, you know, you want to, you know, you don't have to be a certain color to want to save the earth and be good to each other, you know, and be the warriors of the rainbow. So it's like all the people of the world joining together for the cause. And again, it's the revitalization of the teachings, you know, how important it is to bring that back to our children. And a lot of people like this, you know, my ancestors weren't allowed to, so. And it's for the children. So that's the last slide, and that's the end of my presentation. Want to have a discussion on things or questions?
I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for sharing this information. I'm sure, you know, your ancestors have had to deal with some of these things, so it must be painful to speak about. I know it's painful to hear, but it's important. And so I just thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I grew up I went to school that was still mostly run by nuns and the priest. And I could remember, you know, like to be told to not act like an Indian, you know, it was just, and the religion was heavy, you know, it was like a morning prayer every morning. And then we you know, we were kind of like had religion class. We had, you know, to go to the church for first communion, you know, like the church was very heavily involved in the school that I went to. And it was, I think it was up to grade 8 before we didn't have nuns as teachers at that point. You know, we had teachers from Winnipeg coming into the community to teach. So I know we got a little bit of time left if anybody wants to. I know I kind of rushed through it because I didn't know how much, if we would make it all, but I could have slowed down a little. But there is the revitalization, and there, you know, the Head Start program is going, I think, 25 years strong now, teaching the young kids the culture, and those parents are having their kids and teaching them the culture. So there is hope and there's promise, and there's still a lot of damage out there. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's, you know, like, and the drugs don't help. Like I've been at the App Center on Higgins here for 25 years. And there's always been homeless people, there's always been street people, but they've been pretty peaceful, you know. They've always, you know, you'd see them in the park in little groups drinking all day long and not really harming anybody. But the last 5 years, there's been like meth and crack or whatever else hitting the streets, and they're destructive, man. They're peeling the copper off the Thunderbird house at night. They're stealing the plumbing from their toilets, from our toilets here at the App Center. Like, they're stabbing people. Like, it's destructive what these drugs are doing to people. And yeah, you're really seeing it on the streets, you know. So that's another fight, is to, you know, to help the addicted, and a lot of it is the mental health issues, you know, they're dealing with as well. And so there's a lot of aspects that need healing for sure.
Is there parts of traditional medicine that speak directly to things like mental illness and post-traumatic stress and that? Like, without community, it's so hard to ask that question. But you know, are there modern shaman approaches to that?
Well, I know a lot of times they say to get back to the land, you know, and get away from the drugs and the alcohol, and to come to the land, you know, like to get away from it. Like here, you know, they have homeless shelters, and then you're released in the morning in the middle of a bunch of Main Street bars, you know. And so but I think they're trying to help. Like, you know, they just opened up the new warming center with 150 beds there on Disraeli. So they're trying to get people involved with programming, but it's, you know, easier said than done. You know, you have to want to be helped, and you can't force someone to be helped. So, and some people are comfortable in their situation, you know, they resist help and resist change, you know. And so it comes down to the individual. And but the old saying was, you know, return to the land and remove yourself from the environment, you know, like put yourself in a better circle than the one you're currently in. So that's one thing I heard, was the return to nature, the teachings. And
Do you have some recommended, I haven't done work in schools for some time. My kids are stinky teenagers, but do you have some really well-established programs that you bring to the school system? Because I think that's our biggest challenge, is to change the curriculum and to change the history books and to redefine what we think is historical teaching.
I know there's people out there doing language classes and powwow clubs, and I know every school's got like or a lot of schools have like the Aboriginal liaison officer now. And so I'm not sure what kind of programming they're running, but I know there's an awareness and involvement in getting more Indigenous activities and classes and that going on in the schools. And what those are from school to school, I'm not sure. Like what we went through today, I know that I usually add a few more components to it, and then I do workshops a lot with the Indigenous students and other groups as well. Like I've done stuff with MTS employees and other companies to do Indigenous awareness. But I share what I know, and I know other people share what they know. And so there is things out there, but I'm not sure who on the grand scale what it is though.
Yeah, there's TP Joe Lansley, who's a Métis fellow who goes into the schools a lot and works with TP teachings, and works with all the students, and works with big groups where they build small teepees for themselves to take home. Plus they also erect a teepee on the grounds, and they do all the teachings with them. And then there's Carl Froese, who's actually Mennonite, but he works with Manitoba buckskin, and he has he works with all Indigenous elders and teachings, and about how to harvest animals, actually, and how to tan the skins and the hides, and anyone can take these courses, but he's been actually going up a lot to the northern communities to help take back the knowledge.
Yeah, they're saying that every animal has enough brain to tan its own hide. So there's
Yeah.
it's called brain tanning.
Yeah.
The animal's own brain is enough to tan its hide. And I
Yeah,
see,
so you can learn that from him and the people he's working with. And they also do drum teachings. So there's I can't remember the fellow's name who works out of Manitoba Buckskin, and he'll do drum ceremonies and drum teachings and teach you how to build a drum. From the soaking of the hides and everything to the ceremony before you bang your drum the first time.
there's a local guy, Ray Stevenson, they call him Coco. And I know
Yeah.
they run little powwow clubs and bring kids in to learn how to dance. And if you want to take up the drum, you know, or I think they do once a week or every 2 weeks or something. And now there's stuff at the Thunderbird House once upon a time, but I'm not sure what's being run out of there anymore at the moment. But I know
Well, sorry, at Creative Manitoba, I used to do drum circles, and we would do them. It was 12 weeks, and it would start with a ceremony to bless the hides, and we had elders and Allison Cox, Allie Stony Point, and her husband, who's an elder, would come and bless the hides, and we would take people through a process of making the drum and then learning all the songs and the importance of the drum and all the teachings. And each week had a different theme. So there would be different ceremonies that we would do and we would learn. But because Creative Manitoba our job is to help educate artists on the business side of art, it was very hard to keep the program running because, and this is being recorded, because the funders couldn't quite wrap their head around on how this would benefit or how this was helping artists run their business. And my logic was, well, for some people, it's the first time that they've been in a community or learned their teachings, and it's the first time that they might feel confident, or they might, I remember there was a gal who would show up at the circles, and we ran them out of Thunderbird House for a couple years. And she would show up and she would just sit there, and she was so shy. And then one day she felt comfortable enough to sing and join, and she had an incredibly beautiful voice. And it was those moments that I would try to relate to the funders, that this is her moment. This is where she has confidence, she has community. The next step might be she works on her artwork, or the next step might be she carries these teachings to someone else. But it is a very colonized way of looking at things, as opposed to about community and grounding. So we might have been the ones at Thunderbird House for some of those nights, Jacques. That
yeah.
we did it I think I did it for 3 years.
Add about Ray Coco Stevenson, if I can. Worked with him a few times now, and he's just a phenomenal person. Has an energy like I've not seen in anyone else, I think. He led a drum workshop over Zoom. I don't know, during one of the lockdowns last year for my team of educators in our Sistema after school program. And he works regularly, with a lot of school divisions and stuff. And here's the plug, you can see him perform with my former student this weekend with the symphony. They did a piece as part of the Cranky Festival about a month ago, and it's now been arranged. One of the pieces has been arranged for the orchestra. So that's what I was watching in the rehearsal earlier. I couldn't miss it.
Wow.
But really cool guy.
So how can we watch that? Brent?
So there's in-person or live stream option. There's concerts tonight and tomorrow at 7:30 and 2 o'clock on Sunday. And I'll be there Sunday actually. If you happen to come to that one, I'll probably be in the lobby somewhere. Tickets start at about $25, I think. And for the live stream option, you can buy just the one concert. We're using a new platform. The web address is here. I'll put it in the chat. mywso.tv.
Oh, cool.
And you get access to the streamed version for 30 days from today. Yeah, today's Friday.
Oh, cool.
So you can rewatch it as many times as you want in that period of time.
I've also brought in Mike Pierre he worked through St. Norbert Arts Center, and also he's, I think, runs the Indigenous Student Center at U of M, and he did a really great, he brought, I think it was called his medicine bag, and he did like kind of a nice conversation, and it was really great for the kids and the grown-ups alike. But I think I'm just finding like my challenge is that it's something that you have to really seek out. Like it's part of the systemic racism that we're all trying to battle, is that like, why do we have to convince people? And even just as simple as we have an artist that they have a traditional beaded guitar strap that was lost in a fire, and I can't find anyone to give me an accurate estimate of its replacement value because there aren't anyone doing necessarily this type of traditional beading anymore, so that I can't get a written quote from anyone. And the insurance won't, like, they just want a very simple retail value of something that is irreplaceable, really, and it's become abundantly clear. So it's these kind of things that I find are really, really frustrating, and I just really want to seek out ways where we can make it, like, accessibility is always the challenge, right? Like if we have to convince the gatekeepers all the time that this is valid knowledge, then like we're never going to get to the other side of this. And it must be incredibly, it must feel futile for people of Indigenous ancestry to constantly be proving themselves, their existence, really. Like, no, this is our reality. This was our, this is our history, and not have anything implemented in a systemic way. And it's taking so long. Like academics are so notoriously frustrating that way. And I just wish we could get past that apprehension all the time and always having to sell it.
Damn straight.
Yeah, pictures of the guitar strap. Because I can maybe find someone to do a replacement.
Well, I'm not sure if we can replace them yet. I just really need a written estimate on hours. Like I have the dimensions of how long the strap was, and I have the patterns of photos so that you can see the patterns, but they weren't made on a loom, and and unless I find somebody, which I haven't been able to, I've exhausted my search trying to find somebody who makes hand beaded guitar straps. I can't. But if you have an idea, Jacques, I would absolutely love it. I can send that to you for sure.
So I do a lot of art appraisals for companies.
Oh, do you?
For insurance purposes. Yes, I do quite a bit of that.
Well, that would be an incredible resource for me, because I've been reaching out all over the place, and I have lots of artisan friends that do a lot of beadwork, and none of them want to touch this. So it would be really helpful. Thank you, Jacques.
Yeah, no problem.
Have you spoken to Joanne Soldier? Do you know Joanne?
I don't know her super well. I just don't have a contact for her, or I would have already.
Oh,
I've reached out to a few of the artisans that do the Story Boot program through Manitoba Mucklucks, but I don't have her contact. So if you want to pass that along to me too. Eventually, I'm sure they'll be, commissioned to replace, but right now we want to get something to the insurance, and it's very frustrating.
All right.
Doc, I was wondering if you could tell us more about the gallery. We kind of talked about it at the first session, but I'd like to know, like,
Okay,
more specific, like how can I come and visit? And
we're on the main floor at 181 Higgins, which is the old train station, but now
okay,
the Aboriginal Center now, but now it's Neegaland Center. So we're, yeah, you come in through the visitor parking area and they screen you, you wash your hands, and then they allow you to come up to the gallery. We have a bit of a website at CanadianPlainsGallery.com. Not everything's on there. We have more product in store than we do online. And again, we have more fine art. We have a lot of mostly paintings and carvings, a bit of jewelry. We're kind of staying away from the crafts stuff, but more for space wise, we're loaded with artwork.
Can you turn your computer around without unplugging it?
I hope that works. Last time I did this, I destroyed my connection.
We lost you.
I'll try to.
So it's jam-packed.
Yeah, there's. And there's stuff in the cases and. Yeah, there's cases full of stuff with carvings, and there's bins and bins of originals and prints to go through as well. And so it's, yeah, I've been doing this for 25 years now. We have a nice collection, and we have people from all over that come in. We had a couple ladies from BC saying that, you know, they stopped the galleries from BC to Manitoba to Toronto, and I had the best collection they've come across. So I get really nice compliments at times on the collection here. And then a lot of artists seem to pass away young. Like there's a lot of artists from the 90s that I've collected that are, you know, I don't know if it's lifestyle or what, but it's a lot of them, you know, they're not going to live the rich life, you know, like a lot of them are kind of living day by day like everybody else, you know, and what they do in their personal time is their business. But yet a lot of talent, from birch bark biting to paintings, carvings, some caribou hair tufting, and mixture of jewelry, beaded lanyards. And when I first started, I was trying to do everything because I was working with that membership from the Aboriginal arts group. So I was trying to set up the fashion shows and the photo shoots and you know, power demonstrations for schools and artists in the schools. And finally, over the years, I just kind of, you know what, I'm just going to do the gallery. I'm just going to focus on the art gallery and not spread myself too thin. So, yeah, so now I do photo shoots still. And next weekend, I'm doing the AMC Christmas Jingle Mingle photo booth, but mostly I'm at the gallery and doing teachings like this on the side and trying to catch up to my website and get the new product online, which is I'm kind of behind schedule on. So, but I write poetry. I wrote a book of poems and, you know, won a bunch of awards when I was younger in my poetry. And usually I read a few in my workshops, but I didn't get everything ready for today though. I didn't think I'd be going that route. So, and
Oh,
yeah, that's kind of my background, I guess. And I enjoy what I do. You know, it's my passion, and I could see myself doing this till I'm gone.
You're definitely a good teacher. Very interesting to listen to.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I enjoy sharing. So And I'm lucky in that situation that I have. I found myself in the middle of, you know, the power dancers and the artists and the designers. So like I have, you know, so many people in the community sharing their stories with me and the teachings with me that I became kind of a sponge to it. And then here in the building itself, I had access to the sweats and, you know, the ending the Sundance. So I found myself in a very unique position to be able to access all of that stuff that I shared today and from the community itself. And again, like there's many variances. Like what I shared isn't the one and only way of, you know, everyone's got different teachings and slight variances on how they teach, but the most of it is the same.
So how, now, can you talk about how non-Indigenous arts organizations would incorporate Indigenous dancers or drummers or artists and how to engage them, like how to approach them with a tobacco offering, or what do you suggest would be the best protocol?
For powwow, definitely, because I know every time I need someone to do it, like if a school or a company wants to go through me to set up a powwow demonstration or an honor song or something, then tobacco would definitely be involved. But for artists coming in to sell their artwork or bring things on consignment, I don't go that route. The respect is there, but yeah, no, I don't offer tobacco in that situation. It's more like a business interaction, I guess, as opposed to a spiritual or a cultural one. The culture is still there, and it's still respected and presented with respect. But yeah, no, I've yet to offer, unless something very special comes in. Like I know years ago, an old lady came in and she was like in her 90s, and she had a beautiful, you know, a 18-inch stick, and she said a chief came to her 4 years ago, and it had an eagle claw at the end of it and leather strapping at the end of it, and he wanted it beaded. So she beaded the whole stick from the claw to the handle, and it was just gorgeous. And she says, I'm moving to Saskatchewan with my daughter, and I don't want to bring this with me. She goes, all I want is the $60 I was promised for the beadwork. So something like that, I would offer tobacco or a drum or something of cultural significance. And so I have it in my purse. I never put it out for sale. That became part of my personal collection. But it was just a gorgeous dancing stick or a talking stick or something. But I have that at home now, and it has a few eagle feathers on it and the eagle claw at the end of it, and with just her beadwork on it. So, and that's what I like about my job. You never know what's coming through the door, you know, like sometimes you get some amazing soapstone carvings or wood carvings or really interesting paintings and styles that sometimes you see for the first time, you know. And so I'm fortunate in that sense. I'm surrounded by beauty, and there's energy in the artwork. Like people come in the gallery and they're like, wow, I feel at peace in here. And I'm like, yeah, you're surrounded by teachings, you know, you're surrounded by the animals, and even myself, I feel it if I had doing a whole bunch of stuff and it was hectic on the weekend or something like that, and I come to work first thing Monday morning and I walk in the door and I'm just like, yeah, you just feel the energy change, you know.
That's amazing that you get to experience that every Monday. Usually people have the opposite when they walk in the door to their work.
Yeah, no, I can't complain about my surroundings. That's
Well, we're almost out of time. And if anyone would like to share anything, any thoughts, final words, that would be amazing. I will be sending out, I'll be downloading the links, like all the recordings, and I'll be sending the links out to all of you. I'm hoping by Monday at the latest, maybe even today, but I'm not sure. Yeah, and then I'm gonna send out also an evaluation, just so that we can get some of your feedback and thoughts. Because this is the first time we've done this online, it's a, you know, it's a bit, it's just different. So, and it's nicer to be in person, but if anyone has anything they can, you know, any feedback, anything they want to see, just write it down on the form. That would be awesome.
Just thank you again, Jacques, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.
pleasure. Well, thank you everybody for taking part in the class and allowing me to share. Enjoyed myself.
I don't know if I'll sleep tonight, I gotta say, because there's so much going around in my head as far as moving forward and reflecting backward, and just thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's a heavy topic for sure, and yeah, it still weighs heavy.
Mm.
Speaking, there was something a friend of mine said to me. It's nice to talk about the heavy topics with a light, open heart.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And that's what you have, Jacques.
Thanks. Yeah.
I guess it's made listening to the harder subjects and topics. I don't know if easier is the right word, but okay.
But at least there's solutions now. Like for 500 years, there wasn't, you know. And now there's a place to turn it around now finally, as opposed to repress, you know, like so.
Right. Well, with that, thank you all so much. Thank you, Jacques.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Really can't thank you enough. I hope everyone is well and that you have a good weekend,
Yeah.
and that you are inspired.
Thank you, Arlie and Jacques.
All right. Thanks.
Peace, everyone.